Hello everybody, welcome to a new episode on the Lamborghini replica. We've finally completed all of the preparations, and we've almost even sorted the flywheel situation. At the very least, we have the right gearbox for this V12 engine, one that actually fits. And today we can finally start mounting all of this in the Lamborghini engine bay. Yeah, start running into new problems. Because something is bound to give us trouble. Already the exhaust is interfering with the axle shaft. Dude, that's a very minor problem. Well, yeah, but the problems are starting to manifest. I'd say the most important task at hand is to fit the engine with the gearbox, install the starter motor, sensors, and all of that. Because that's going to allow us to invite over the electrician to begin work on the wiring. That's an entire parallel process which is going to require the engine being in position. Basically, we need it to be sitting on the motor mounts, for the starter to work, for there to be a fuel supply, so that we can begin work on engine management. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting engineering exercise, and hopefully we find the answers to all of the questions that arise. I wouldn't hold my breath. We can always resort to plan B. That is the Nissan engine we have in the corner. We decided to keep it for now in case we need it. Oh, hell no. Well, as a last resort, I mean. Right, guys, you make yourselves comfortable, and let's get started. It's been a while since I've seen him like this. So these past 90 minutes, we weren't even filming anything. Yegor was contemplating. He's been walking around the car, trying to figure out how to mount the engine. Also, he kept saying that if we remove the engine before we figure this out, we'll have to do it a dozen more times later, as in test fit it. Now I think he's finally come up with something. We'll have to revise everything a mere 3 times. So we've already fitted the motor mounts to the engine, to which Yegor has welded on a few frame rail mock-ups. Those we're gonna weld onto the actual tubing once we get the engine into its final position. One critical issue is that we are gonna have to cut the floor, so there will be some mutilation happening. Oh, definitely. We've mutilated the car before, and I'm sure we'll continue to. So pretty much everything behind the remaining plastic is gonna be modified. Yeah, pretty much. Take the exhaust manifolds, for example. They sort of wrap around the gearbox, and that's an added layer of complication when you're removing or installing it. In the original W140, there wasn't a lot of room in the transmission tunnel. But here we do have extra space, so we can just cut off the twisty bits and make removing the gearbox a whole lot easier. Also, we've decided to cut off the lower rails, the ones with the suspension mounting points. The suspension we'll be revising, seeing that it didn't do all that well during that last racetrack session. So yeah, we'll be cobbling together something new. We still might change our minds, since the problem might have been in the steering rack and not the suspension setup. We'll discuss the technical tidbits a tad later. For now, we need to get rid of everything that we definitely know we won't need. So one full day after we began the overhaul, Yegor has decided that our best bet would be the factory Mercedes subframe. I already even figured out how to set up the motor mounts, but then I thought that the Mercedes layout might work for us. And that's why we cut this out from the donor car and are now preparing to adapt it to the Lamborghini. We might even want to bring the rest of that Mercedes over here, given that we've already made trips to get the mounts, the subframe. You mean to say the brackets for the motor mounts? Yeah, I meant them. This is the bracket for one of them that we chopped off. The mounts themselves are actually torn, as it turns out, and OEM replacements cost a small fortune. For the V12 you can only get original mounts, so we'll go with the ones for the S500, which I'm about to go out and buy, while Yegor trims the subframe for us to then fit all of this to the Lambo replica. I have some great news. We found a set of mechanical throttle bodies to replace our drive-by-wire throttles that we won't be able to use. They're for an older Mercedes engine, and the bolt pattern is really close. All that's required is some slight modification, and we can slap them onto the engine. Right now we're gonna clean them, get them ready, weld up some old holes, drill a few new ones, and finally test fit them. We decided we should weld up the holes for the engine oil cooler lines. The radiator itself is pretty beat up, and there's really nowhere in the car for us to put it. Here you can see it has two holes for the feed and return lines. The oil fills a dedicated chamber parallel to the primary oil galleries, so blocking this off shouldn't cause any problems. There appears to be a thermostat in there, so there won't be any drop in engine oil pressure. Welding these up is gonna spare us potential headaches. We found a pretty elegant way to simplify the lubrication system. We're deleting the radiator, and this looks really good, as if it came that way from the factory. But we have a new problem. You can see that this gasket is torn, which resulted in a massive oil leak, and I don't know if we'll be able to find a replacement gasket. Trouble comes in twos. After taking everything apart, we noticed the starter is broken. As you can see, the terminal has broken off from the solenoid. No matter, we'll just replace the solenoid and that'll straighten things out. Appears to be a proper fit. Yeah, I think it's the right one. So a number of days have gone by, and in that time I was able to find a gasket. There was only one for sale in all of St. Petersburg. It was expensive, but thankfully the order went through, and we can replace this torn gasket. You are not fixing this using a sealant. We got the starter motor back in place after repairs, and we're about to install that oil chamber. Also, we're waiting for our mysterious electrician to arrive, to turn the engine over a bit and track the impulses from the sensors. And this is our current workspace. We've set up an imitation of the ignition system, and we're waving the crank position sensor around the flywheel. That generates a signal. There it is on the screen. It was crucial for us to read the intensity and parameters of the signal to run the ECUs, and that's giving us an idea of how spark is occurring. Okay, we've set up all of the positive and negative wires needed to run the fuel injectors, and now I'm working on the throttle bodies. That's coming together pretty well. They open and close just fine, but there is a problem. When you open the one on the right, the one on the left follows with a slight delay, so the progression is off. Both of them crack open at once, but after a certain point, they're no longer synchronized. I'll try and modify these links, see if that helps. So I went ahead and shifted this one, and though things have gotten way better, but look at this. Here the socket is a tight fit, but if we were to try it on the other side, it's pretty loose. The engine will happily run as it is, with them opening up at once, but yeah, they start to get out of whack. I would like for them to be fully synchronized, which is why I'm gonna play around with this link now. I think I might have made a mistake when I was welding it on. There's no play in any of this, but for some reason we have a delay, which is something we have to fix. So we were almost about to install the engine, but then we noticed that here we have a bunch of exhaust gas recirculation and other eco-related stuff. And since we're removing all of that, we're gonna have to block off these holes. I think we should drill it out to about 7 mil and tap some thread. Yegor has been literally living in the garage these past 3 weeks. And now comes the moment of truth that we've been working towards all this time. Can I give it some gas? No? Are you hearing this? Now it sounds like an actual Lambo. It's shooting flames and popping. Dude, this is so awesome. You actually did it. Oh my god, it stinks in here. Should I switch it off? Yes, please. Congratulations, I never had any doubt in you. Yeah, you just keep talking. He was the one telling me that Yegor would never get it to start, that we should have left the Nissan engine. Let me tell you a bit about what we were dealing with. The first issue was that this is a super rare engine. It took a while for that oil gasket to get here, and it was the only one up for order. And on top of that, there's a crack in the bell housing, where the starter is located. And that's despite there being 2 mounting points. That's not even the bell housing, that's the engine block. I couldn't quite get the starter motor to fit. You'd recall that it all came in here disassembled, as in the starter was separate from the engine. Anyway, I was simply unable to mount it. I even had to trim it in one spot. And once I did get it in, a small piece of aluminum broke off. I mean, it's nothing critical. After that, the problems kept on piling up. The starter apparently wouldn't have fitted anyway, because it's most likely for a different engine. The gap is the same as when we started. I've actually got it mounted on a couple of spacers. As you do. One thing I'd like to draw your attention to is the throttle body assembly that took Yegor forever to make. Finding the parts took a while, as did synchronizing their movement. Yeah, as you might recall, this used to have a couple of big drive-by-wire throttle bodies. Those were driven by electric motors, and there was no way to actuate them mechanically. It's like when we were transporting that car from Rostov, when one throttle body was opening only 20% of the way, and we still made it to St. Petersburg. And since we aren't running the factory ECU, Yegor has been making all of this mechanical. Well, I mean, we are running the ECU, it's just that we have more of them now, 4 units in total. One for the ignition, another dedicated one for the fuel system, and they're tuned to ensure that nothing bad happens to the engine. So it tops out at $3 grand, and the whole thing is essentially in safety mode. What's curious is that they're for a Volkswagen. Someone did try to remove the decals, but it's still obvious what's going on here. Yeah, there is a bit of Volkswagen, but the internals have been modified. Now I understand how this works. But the concept was conceived by our secret diagnostician. The system to control the fuel injectors had to undergo a complete overhaul. It's nothing like what it was from the factory. What we're seeing is pretty much the finalized setup, am I correct? We just need to reflash the ECU as soon as we get an exhaust going, and attach the gearbox to the motor. Yes. Like you said, once we have an exhaust, we can run a few wideband oxygen sensors. They'll show us what's going on with the mixture, and based on that information, we'll get the tune to where we want it. We definitely don't want the mixture to be too lean. I take it we don't care too much about fuel economy, as this isn't going to be a daily driver, and so we can make the mixtures rich, and we won't get taxed for all of that horsepower. In the meantime, we've also been sourcing all of the missing exterior bits. And we even seem to have solved that puzzle. We've got parts on the way from the States, from Germany. Some bits apparently got stranded. What matters is that soon we'll have all of the mesh and the badging, and we might even replace the current headlights with a different set, one that better suits the car. The thing is that the custom headlights we had made for us are now completely ruined. But overall, the car is coming together in a big way, so this year is definitely starting on a positive note. It was vital to get the engine to start, which we did. From here it's all fine-tuning. And so that's where we are currently. We'll continue to keep you posted on all new developments. Next time we're going to try making some progress with the engine, attaching the gearbox, modifying the suspension. Thankfully the cage is fine. The engine is in position. We're free to begin assembly. I still want to revise the lower part of the cage with the suspension links, because the current setup is pretty agricultural. We did have to make a bunch of quick revisions to accommodate that Nissan engine, because we had a bunch of trouble fitting it. The filter kept interfering with this and that, but the basic structure is going to be preserved, right? Despite you having to make a few changes. Now this is going to be way easier. Won't be as time-consuming. Okay, well, keep your eyes peeled for new videos. And props to everyone who's giving us a thumbs up, and who appreciates that we are working on the build, as opposed to just dragging this out for the sake of making more content. I mean, we'd love to get this done faster, but a replica build from the ground up is not a simple matter. Even the throttle bodies, you'd think it's just a matter of bolting them on and connecting them with a rod, but first I had to find mechanical throttle bodies of the right diameter, which also had to open in the right direction, by the way. I had to do a ton of cutting, not to mention they're the same. They're both right-side oriented. That is correct. One of them bolted straight on, but the other had to be modified. And if you're moving something, you do it on both, because the progression of how they open changes, and all of a sudden they're no longer synchronized. And there was a lot of custom work involved in synchronizing them. Right now you can see it, it's all there, but before we had none of this, meaning I had to get creative. Not to mention I had to figure out how to route the whole thing. Okay, so now you have an idea of how this is progressing. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, see you guys soon.